Hello, and welcome to the 19th episode of the Students for Criminal Justice Reform Board podcast. I am your host, Marissa Mack, and Frank Stiefel, board chair, joins us to co-host. Today, our guest is criminal defense attorney and reentry advocate at the Legal Aid Society and fellow Temple Owl, Emma Goodman. Hi, Emma.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Frank, for joining us on the call as well.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So to give our audience a bit of background on our guest, Emma Goodman is an experienced criminal defense attorney and reentry advocate at the Legal Aid Society. Emma began her career at Legal Aid in the Manhattan Trial Office, defending over 2,000 clients against prosecutions ranging from misdemeanors to serious felonies. In October 2017, when New York's new sealing law went into effect, Emma moved to the unit of Legal Aid and founded Case Closed, a new initiative at the Legal Aid Society aimed at helping people seal their criminal records. Emma is a graduate of Temple Law School, where she was actively involved in criminal defense clinical programs and helped to fund the Principal Project. Emma is also a member of the Capital Punishment Committee of the New York City Bar Association and is actively involved in the reentry advocacy community here in New York. What an impressive background.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess, could you tell us a little bit about how you became involved with legal aid and what led you to focus on criminal law?
Well, I actually worked as a paralegal for several years before law school, which helped me to decide that I wanted to be a lawyer, but was in big law firms and definitely knew that that wasn't where I wanted to go. So I had several internships, one with the Death Penalty Information Center when I was in Washington, D.C., which is especially formative for me because it was the first time that I had met former public defenders, and they were incredible advocates in what they were doing and in talking about their prior work and what they had done as public defenders. And I was so inspired by their stories about advocating for their clients throughout the years. So I got into wanting to be a public defender right when I started thinking about being a lawyer. It was the closest thing to being a social worker that I could think of, which was the other route that I had thought about taking. But I thought that working in the public defender community was a really good way of combining my desire to help people with an actual legal framework where I could take my emotional frustrations about how hard people's lives were and how much I wanted to help them and actually apply this legal framework to specific problems so that I could both help people and remove myself intellectually from the situation. It seemed like a much better long-term solution for my happiness and my ability to continue helping people kind of throughout my life. So luckily so far that still holds true. It's been 8 years, but.
Wow.
So we also were curious if you could talk a little bit about, and I think you mentioned a little bit about this already, but how the Case Closed project came about, and if this has always been available and if there's been other forms of it, what that has looked like.
This is the first project that we've ever had like this at the Legal Aid Society. So it came about because this new law went into effect, and I, along with many people, was very excited about the law because it's the broadest sealing law that has ever existed in New York State. So I pushed a lot for there to be somebody working on it full time, and luckily I was allowed to be the person doing that. So I came on in October, right when the law went into effect, to be the full-time point person for implementing this new sealing law. And since I've gotten there, I've created this Case Closed program, which is both helping people to seal their cases under this new law and also working in a broader sense, to try to advocate for people who are being discriminated against because of their criminal records, both in terms of pushing for better laws in the future and advocating for people when they are being discriminated against, getting them help in that sense. Now, legal aid does have amazing civil attorneys that are helping people in employment law and housing law and any way they can. But having somebody focus on it 100% of the time, focus on this kind of reentry advocacy work and specifically on sealing and hopefully expungement in the future is the first time we've been able and had the resources to do that. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine. Can you talk a little bit also like who specifically is eligible for the Case Closed project?
I can. It's unfortunately more complicated than it should be. But basically, this law allows for somebody with two or fewer convictions, so 1 or 2 convictions that are at least 10 years old, to have their criminal record sealed in New York State. There are certain convictions that are excluded from that, mainly violent felonies and sex offenses. But just because they're excluded from that does not mean that you can't get another case sealed if it came after one of those violent felonies or sex offenses. So you still may be eligible. It's a pretty narrow law because it's 2 convictions at the most, which means that even if you have 3 misdemeanors, so 3 low-level convictions, you are still not eligible for sealing under this law.
Okay, so just to get a kind of a handle on everyone that is eligible or who might be interested in this project, how do people really, who determines if they're eligible? So do people kind of know what their history is and they determined, maybe I should apply for this, or is there like an outreach in terms of, how you guys reach out to people who might be eligible for this project or this program? How are they kind of identified, or do people self-identify for this program or project?
Well, so far it's been mostly people that have self-identified because they've heard about this new law and they've sought out who can help them. But we are doing a lot of outreach. A lot of people actually don't know the specifics of their criminal history. So one of the things that we found that we often have to do is request people's rap sheets and get official copies of their rap sheets, which is something our community justice unit has been working to do as much as they can. So they've been working in coordination with my unit to request people's rap sheets and give people copies of those, and then also determine their eligibility for sealing, which is the best way that we found to determine actual eligibility so far.
And the community justice unit, is this something that's in every community, or have you guys kind of outlined which communities you're in, or how do they really pick out, who they're going to look at or which rap sheet they're going to review?
Well, it's in 18 different locations throughout New York City. So the Community Justice Unit is part of the Cure Violence campaign, which is funded by the New York City courts. The Cure Violence campaign has 18 different community organizations throughout the 5 boroughs that do community work and anti-violence work within their neighborhoods. So they're neighborhood offices that are doing pretty incredible work in those areas. The Community Justice Unit works specifically with those 18 sites. So the Community Justice Unit is lawyers and paralegals and community outreach coordinators at the Legal Aid Society, and then they're in connection with these 18 units around the city. We have found that people, when we have informational meetings, do come even if they're not in that what we call a catchment area. But I do worry that we're missing people that might not be involved in that specific community group, so they might just not know or might not think to come because they don't look at the flyer. So we are trying to figure out other ways to have a broader impact and get the word out more extensively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one item on that. I actually at a community board meeting, I'm in East Harlem, and the DA's office spoke briefly about it. But when I mentioned this case closed and record sealing, there were still a number of people that were unaware of the initiative, which I think is good because then you're able to reach other people. And there may be other individuals who this applies to who may not even know that this exists.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think the numbers are not very specific because nobody can figure out the exact numbers, but hundreds of thousands of people throughout New York State are eligible for this. And most of them just don't know.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about the difference? Because I know a lot of folks get this confused between record sealing and expungement.
Yeah, definitely. I wish that we had expungement, which means that it's better.
Yeah.
So sealing is making a case invisible basically to certain people. So when you have a sealed record, you still have a record, especially under this law. Expungement is actually erasing your record completely so that you can say to anybody, I do not have a criminal record. It essentially erases the conviction's existence from your history. It's as though it never happened. Whereas sealing, it didn't happen for the purposes of whether you have to disclose it to certain people. But in reality, you still have a criminal record and you always will in New York State, even with this sealing.
And does that mean like certain agencies will have access to it versus other ones won't?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Absolutely. And you talked a little bit about some of the efforts that have been done as far as figuring out who qualifies and who's eligible to have their records sealed. Can you also just talk a little bit about how big of a change is this new law as far as sealing records for individuals, and what it means for folks who have a criminal record to be able to have this opportunity to have their records sealed?
In my experience so far, it's been pretty incredible to see how meaningful it is for people to have their records sealed. I was initially concerned because it's really not the strongest sealing law, and I know that expungement is so much better in a lot of ways, but I've seen people who have really had their lives improved significantly by not having to disclose their record in certain situations. The place that it's most commonly helping people is in the employment law context. So there are pretty firm laws in New York City especially, but also in New York State, that you can't discriminate against an employee or somebody applying for a job if they have a criminal record. But most employers don't really follow that rule. They do background checks and then just don't give you the job. And people don't really know why that's happening. Private employers now won't be able to see that you have the conviction in the first place, which is really going to make a lot of jobs available to a lot of people. I have one client that got her record sealed. She wanted to be a home health aide, and she went through all the training and actually had a job, and then did a background check in a new job, and they found this conviction from 15 years ago. And she got it sealed and was able to go back to the governing authority and get her certification reinstated, and ended up getting a much better job afterwards, which is pretty amazing.
That's life-changing.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, and it's people that have been out of the criminal system for more than 10 years, which, when you consider really anywhere in the United States, but definitely in New York, once you're in the system and once you have a record, the idea that you would be able to avoid getting caught up in any type of police activity, whether you've done anything wrong or not, is pretty difficult and pretty hard. And people have worked so hard to kind of stay out of trouble and try to move on with their lives in a positive way in order to be able to be eligible for this. So people's stories are amazing. I mean, the things that people have done and accomplished, even with a criminal record, are pretty incredible. I mean, I have clients that have gone to graduate school.
That one piece that holds them back. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people, it's psychological. I mean, they've known their whole adult lives that they have this thing hanging over their head, that they have, and now with the internet especially, older people are very concerned about their children or grandchildren being able to go and Google them and see that they got arrested and got convicted of something back in the 80s or 90s, which their kids and grandkids wouldn't have known anything about, but it is available online.
Mm-hmm.
And people can find that stuff out pretty easily. So hopefully that this will change that.
Yeah. Can you also talk a little bit, so I used to be a community organizer down in Camden, New Jersey, and we were part of a local push as a part of a statewide campaign to ban the box in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that a lot of these ban the box policies have become more and more popular, and a lot of states and cities have passed them. Can you talk a little bit about comparing a policy like ban the box to something like a sealing a record policy, and how they compare and contrast as far as effectiveness?
Well, first off, there actually is a ban the box law here in New York, a lot of which just actually went into effect last year in the summer. So it's pretty recent. So far, it seems like they're working in conjunction with each other really well. I mean, that's the ban the box. They call it the Fair Chance Act here, is what I was talking about when I said specifically in New York City, they are very good laws against record discrimination. That's the ban the box law. I think that they're similar to me in a lot of ways because both of them aren't really fixing the problem that I see.
Mm-hmm.
So they're helping people. They're helping people not to be discriminated against so that they can get jobs. But I think that those people deserve jobs in the first place, and having to cover up their criminal history or threaten financial harm to a company for being upset about their criminal history is really just putting a Band-Aid over the larger problem, which is there are so many people in this country that have criminal records, and they're good people that deserve to have jobs and to work and to have full lives. And I think employers need to understand that they should still hire these people, that having a criminal record doesn't mean that somebody doesn't deserve to work there. So
Right.
I like the laws in that they're helping my clients, but I wish, and it's an optimistic view, but I wish that employers would just recognize the underlying value of the employees regardless of their criminal history, that wasn't something that was so important to people.
And I think too, just the fact that something that you did so long ago may not have any relevance to your capabilities for doing a good job today.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
For being a great employee, and it has no connection at all to your abilities to perform and achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's silly to think that something that you did 15 years ago is how you're defined now. I mean, something I did 15 years ago doesn't define anything about when I apply for a job, because I'm lucky enough not to have a criminal record. But if I did, then I think people would look at that and it would change how they viewed me. And I don't think that that's fair. Eventually, I think everybody should be able to move on and live their lives without that hanging over them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, in your opinion, Emma, what do you think needs to happen in order? I mean, I think you talked a little bit about engaging employers and educating them around the importance of hiring people that are formerly incarcerated who have a criminal record and not having that discriminatory practice. Can you also just talk a little bit about you mentioned expungement? What stands in the way as far as having an expungement policy, and what you think needs to happen in order for that to become a reality in a place like New York City?
I think that what stands in the way of having expungement is how prosecutorial our laws and our city really are.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, the sealing law, any case that is sealed will still be viewable by any law enforcement agency or the district attorney's office or the courts. So if you get arrested, the police can still see your convictions, and the DA can still see your convictions and potentially use them against you if they want to get them unsealed. So for the DA's purposes, they don't really care that much about this law because they're saying, well, the people deserve to have jobs, but I want to know that they're still criminals. And I think that New York State needs to change the way it looks at what a criminal is in order to really have the broad expungement laws that people expect New York to have. There are a group of people that are really pushing for expungement and are hoping to push for expungement legislation. And I think that we will have some expungement in New York, but right now, it seems like it's something that's pretty far off because we have to convince people that you truly have served whatever debt was deemed appropriate to society, and you truly should be able to move on without this hanging over your head at all. And I don't think that the lawmakers really believe that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that.
So I want to ask, what would you say to people that think that we don't need case closed, right? So what do you say to people that say, well, you've made a mistake. Yes, everyone makes mistakes and there are forgivable mistakes, but depending on what you did, maybe case closed shouldn't be in effect, right? Or maybe this is something that we shouldn't latch onto. What do you say to people that, that may say that or think that this is something that we really don't need?
I mean, you're wrong. I think that people always deserve more chances. I think that people are prosecuted very much more so if they are people of color or if they are indigent in New York and in this country as a whole. And that's something that we need to consider in terms of how the criminal system catches up young people of color and prosecutes them and puts them through the system, which is already incredibly traumatic and incredibly hard for everybody that is involved in that, not just the person getting arrested, but everyone in their lives and in their community. And then they tell them that they've served their debt, whether it's doing community service or serving time in prison, and then they get out and they still aren't able to move on. So we just continue this cycle of persecuting young people of color who become older people of color who can't get jobs and can't do what other people in society can. And it's because we think that they don't matter as much as other people. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And they do. So I think it's just a continuation of the subjugation of certain groups of people. And I think that in order to have a society where everybody is valued and everybody is able to contribute as much as they can, then we need to value those people in ways that are actually constructive to their lives. And one of those is not keeping them down because they jumped the turnstile when they were 19 years old, which is the kind of thing that a lot of these people that I'm working with are getting sealed. Or marijuana arrests from the 80s, or not paying for the subway in 1983. It's ridiculous, and they still can't get jobs.
Again, nothing to do with their current life right now or their current situation necessarily.
Yeah, because they haven't been in the criminal system for at least 10 years. Most of my clients, it's been much longer. I also think that in a more constructive way, the not hiring people and not allowing people to get housing that is safe or get jobs where they can actually make enough money to support their family is bad for everybody. So why don't we want people that want to work hard and want to support their families? Why don't we want them to be able to do that? Who is it benefiting to say, well, you're a criminal and you should just sit in this box somewhere away from everybody else?
Right.
That's just making society worse for everybody, not just the former criminal, but everybody.
And I would imagine that you would say to even some of the individuals that, think that this is something that we don't necessarily need, it really impacts people on different levels. So it's not necessarily just impactful for the person that, would have their records sealed, right? It's also helping their family. It also may be affecting the employer, who are, I guess, all of the stakeholders that would be involved or would be somehow impacted by the Case Closed initiative.
Well, definitely, of course, the people that are getting their records sealed and their, family and friends. I think that allowing people to get jobs that they might not otherwise get, or at least and allowing people to make more money will help communities and really will help society on a larger scale. If more people are working, then more people are paying their taxes and, helping their kids with college prep courses, just the things that people do when they have more money and more resources. So I think really it helps everyone. Another thing that I found that is interesting is that it's only been a few months, but I've already seen a lot of people that are in the criminal court system now asking, okay, well, if I stay out of trouble for the next 10 years, I can get this sealed. So I just have to kind of make it through the next 10 years, right? And a lot of clients are asking their criminal lawyers about the sealing law and are saying that this is a motivating factor in them trying to stay out of the system.
Right. Because they know that there's an end goal, right?
Exactly. Whereas before, I've been a criminal lawyer for many years, and basically you get a criminal record and you've got a criminal record forever, and there's nothing that can be done about it, and it's something hanging over you for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. So the idea that this might not be hanging over you forever is, I think, a big motivating factor in people trying to make positive changes and move on in a positive way from a pretty bad situation of getting a conviction.
Right. And is this effective in any other states? Is there anything similar to this any place else besides New York? Or
there are yes, there are a lot of different sealing and expungement laws in different states. So this is a New York state law.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's a CPL 16059 is the statute, but this law was passed last year and only applies here. There are in some states actually much broader sealing and even expungement laws. So New Jersey, for instance, does have some expungement and has much broader sealing. Texas has better sealing laws. Tennessee does, Kentucky. States that you wouldn't think of as having more progressive policies than New York have much broader laws. And one of the states that the expungement advocacy community here in New York is really looking to is Massachusetts, because they have some of the most progressive laws in terms of expungement. They actually have certain types of crimes that are automatically sealed after a certain period of time. You don't have to apply. There's no involvement of the courts. They're just automatically sealed in the computer system.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great. There's nothing that a person needs to do on their end.
Exactly. It just happens. If you don't get rearrested, then that's it. It just happens automatically, which is pretty great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And can you, just as we wrap up, can you talk with us a little bit about how people can find out more about the Case Closed Project, and what people can, do that are listening to this podcast to get involved in some way?
So we have an email now, which I'm very excited about.
Awesome.
It's caseclosed@legal-aid.org. People, of course, have my information and can contact me. We also have a helpline, and I will give you the phone number in just one moment. It is, we have a helpline. It's called the Access to Benefits Helpline in our employment law unit, but they have graciously added sealing questions onto their list of things that they will answer and do a quick intake for. So that helpline is available Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And the number is 888-663-6880. Those are the best two ways to get in touch. I currently am a department of pretty much just one person, so the email will go to me. But eventually, we're getting more people on. We do have pro bono partners that are working with us. And definitely, if people want to get involved as volunteers or help with community outreach, that would be incredible. We definitely would love people to help get the word out.
Well, we will definitely help share the word. Both Frank and I were very excited to hear about this, and so we'll do what we can on our end to, help get the word out about the initiative.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's needed. It's needed. So thank you so much for speaking with us today. Is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners about the initiative? Anything we didn't cover that you want to talk about?
No, just if people think that they might be eligible, don't screen yourself out if you're not sure, because it's more complicated than you might think it is to figure out eligibility. So reach out to us, and there are other things that you can do even if you're not eligible for sealing. There are other things that might be able to help you get a job. So still reach out to us and we'll see if we can help.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma, for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And have a good evening.
Thank you, you too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.